The moment a couple ties the knot, if they don't already have children, the first thing most people ask is, when are you having kids? The pressure we put on couples to procreate is quite perplexing, as is the supreme value we place on the need for those children to be biological. TV presenters Lewis and Hannah Vaughan-Jones recently made headlines for spending £80,000 on 15 rounds of IVF. Fortunately, their last round and final embryo produced a beautiful, healthy baby boy. But theirs is a rare success story. Most people do not have the means nor the resilience to withstand 15 rounds of IVF and are often left childless if they can't conceive. Therefore, surely we should encourage more people to adopt, even those who can conceive naturally. Which is why I welcome a £45 million boost from the government to adoption services to help reduce the number of children in care waiting for a permanent home. We need to place more value on raising a child than birthing a child. Having the same DNA is not the be-all and end-all. Love is what matters most.
I despaired when I saw the figure, 76,000 children in care, which is a shocking amount. That's a small town. And I also despair quite often when I read that people are spending vast sums of money on having surrogate children, because why don't they just adopt? So I was adopted. I was 2.5.
Wow.
I'd been in a Catholic children's home in Cheltenham, run by the nuns. Mercifully, I don't have a recollection of it. But I was adopted by a very nice working-class set of parents. They already had 3 children of their own.
So they had biological children
Biological
already.
children. Mum had lost a couple of kids in labour, but the priest came to the school and said there's lots of children who need homes. I know you haven't got much. My dad worked for British Leyland, my mum worked for a warehouse, but they adopted me. They brought me up as their own, although I don't look the same as my siblings. I'm a bit slimmer and more handsome.
Of course.
But nobody could say that my mum and dad treated me any differently to my brother and 2 sisters, who still I see all the time. Mum and dad aren't with me now anymore, but they were incredibly proud of how it worked out. And I would say to people watching, it isn't that scary, because you can be loved just as much as if I was a birth brother or sister. And if they hadn't adopted me, God knows how many years I could have been there, because 2.5 is quite late on. Most people want to be adopted at 5 weeks. You can mould them very early on, and it's just the obvious way to do it. And I just know a colleague the other day who's adopted 2 kids who are 5 and 7. It's not easy.
Can I ask, Andrew, has it, obviously there are ups and downs to any sibling relationship, and I've experienced that myself with blood siblings. So are there moments at the down times where the fact that this distinction between birth of sibling and blood sibling is raised at a moment of weakness by anyone, or has that never been an issue?
Do you know, in all the times I've fought with my brother and 2 sisters, it never cropped up. Kids at school were cruel, because kids are cruel, and they would often say, well, you're not really a Pierce, you're because I come from Irish stock. But you know,
you're an X, Andrew X.
Absolutely. Well, I was Patrick until I was 2.5, and I wrote a letter to the Daily Mirror, which is, I wanted to be a journalist when it was announced that the law was changing so that adopted kids could track down their birth parents. Marjorie Proops wrote a column in the Daily Mirror saying why she thought this was a good idea, and I wrote a letter to the Daily Mirror saying why I thought it was a bad idea, pointing out that, in my view, blood isn't thicker than water. My real mum and dad are the ones who adopted me, and I'll say that till I go to my grave.
It's interesting, you know, Piers and I...
to find your...
You're always curious.
Yes.
You're always curious, and you think about it. It's another story.
It's interesting, you know, Piers and I are very good friends, and so I've known this for as long as I've known him, but one of my biggest regrets is that when I was about 5, my parents, who couldn't have any more kids naturally, said to me when I was 5, you know, well, how would you feel if we adopted a child? And I said no, and it's one of the biggest regrets of my life, because I wanted my mum and dad to myself, and I couldn't conceive of someone...
So were you an only child?
I was an only child, and they couldn't have any more kids, and they wanted more. But and it's a huge regret of mine that I was so against it. But anyway...
and did they not do it because of you, said?
Yeah, they did. They didn't do it because of me. But what we're going to have to do, because of all these kids waiting to be adopted, I've been writing stories about this adoption process since I was a young reporter, and we have to make it's a long,
It's an
torturous,
arduous process.
invasive process. It can take 2.5 years or more than that. And a lot of parents with the best will in the world who have got big hearts, they can't take it after 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a question. There's a lot of BAME.
Bring you in.
Yeah, there's a lot of BAME kids. One of the biggest, that babies are the hardest to adopt.
Particularly mixed race children.
They're the ones that, I think there's a phrase, it's the lower, slower rate of adoption. But the authorities are stopping those kids going to white families. They're saying, what do you think about that? I think to me the family should be about, if it's a loving family, it doesn't matter what colour the skin is.
Well, the thing is, the issue with that is particularly sort of in the 70s and 80s, where you had a lot of, it was mainly mixed race children who were adopted by white parents, often raised in communities where they were the only person of colour.
Yes.
And there were all sorts of problems associated with that. And I think that if we are going to change the law so that, because as it stands now, one of the parents has to be somebody of colour, we're going to change that law, then what we have to do is make sure that that couple has people of colour in their social circle, and actually makes a point of teaching that child about its culture, because there are all sorts of issues that come that you can only understand if you are a person of colour.
I get that, but if there's no...
It's very important.
I mean, you said it's a very difficult process. There's a woman called Dr. Carol Humden, who is the chief executive of the children's charity Coram, who disagrees with you.
It's actually not an arduous or lengthy process, but it is a sincere one, a process designed to enable people to find out what has happened for the children that are waiting for adoption and whether adoption is right for them. But normally the process would take just a little under a year, and you would come forward to an agency near you to get the help and support from the social workers to prepare yourself and then to be matched with a child.
Greg?
I mean, in my friends and family, there was quite a few adopted children. Some have been incredibly successful as adoptions. A few have been disasters because the kids are very difficult. And I mean, you're right, nobody tells you about that. And the support afterwards, after adoption, is pretty poor, really. And what do you do if suddenly you've got a child that is incredibly difficult, violent, gets involved in all sorts of problems?
But I would say as well, though, a birth child can turn out to be very difficult.
Oh, yes.
Let's be honest.
Yes. So
trust me.
Parents know.
Exactly, and I think that's a real point, that you can't send your birth child back.
No.
So,
Exactly.
Can I just make a quick point, and I'll bring you in, Magic? But that's the whole point of this money. It is also to provide support post-adoption too.
I want to touch on Carol's point about BAME adoptions as well, but let's first hear from Sue Armstrong-Brown, the Chief Executive of Adoption UK.
1 in 10 adoptions now go to single adopters. About the same proportion go to same-sex adopters. So people from all walks of life are very much encouraged to come forward to adopt. The sad thing is that the numbers of children waiting in care for adoption are outnumbering many times over the numbers of people coming forward to adopt, and that's something that is urgent to address. We're glad to see the government investing some more money into encouraging adoption, and it's very important that equal attention is given to supporting these placements after the children come home to their adoptive families.
Now, she does say more needs to be done in terms of the fact that there are a number of children waiting. Now, your question about BAME adoption. So, my father is married not to my mother, and his wife, my father's wife, moved from Pakistan, and therefore English is her second language, and she doesn't primarily speak English at home to my father. They speak in Urdu or Punjabi with each other. Now, they tried to adopt recently some Syrian refugees, or I think it was even foster, so don't quote me on which one it was, but they were, eventually, when they went through the process, so it doesn't seem to be as easy as one may assume, because they were rejected.
It's not easy.
And the reason for the refusal, so it even checks the boxes on the whole BAME situation, and you'd expect Syrian refugees, also Muslims, that they would need a home desperately, but the reason that they apparently gave, and I don't know the details, was that her English wasn't good enough. Now, my father's English is fluent, and I just wonder whether that... If one of the parents, my dad, speaks fluent English and the other one is an immigrant anyway, her English by definition won't be that good, and they're in Southend where, it's a majority white population, they're going to be speaking English at school anyway. And I just felt when I heard that news that, Syrian refugees need a home, and I don't understand how these things were worked out and why that refusal
But they
was
also
given.
factor age,
Yeah.
so they would have
Yeah.
also
It could
taken
have
your
been that.
dad's
It
age
could have
into
been that.
consideration.
Yeah.
They're all
Well,
sure.
but this week, you know, Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, said only this week that they've got to change some of these presumptions. It's after that that middle-class Indian couple won that High Court case. They've won damages because they were
adopt a white
rebuffed
child.
from
Yes.
adopting a white
Yes.
child. He said we've got to stop presumptions about race and income because the important thing is to get these kids, 76,000, I repeat, in care. That's a whole town into loving
that's
homes.
what I was
Cameron
gonna
tried
say.
to overturn the race element. He tried to overturn that law when he was in power and didn't get to do that. But what is disturbing as well is, you know, there's a 20% return rate on adopted kids.
Is that really?
Yeah, so they're put into so the social services don't tell the parents the full story. The parent can't handle it. So the poor kid gets thrown back into the system, probably ruined for life, actually.
But then you look at the social worker's role and you think, if you're the social worker in this, you're spending your life trying to get these children adopted. You are bound in the end to paint a rosier picture than the reality.
To try and get the child into a home.
Yes.
Well, coming up on the pledge, why I'll be bunging a bob for the Brexit bongs.